See a blotch blob yellowish. Wants to stamp his trademark on everything. Instance, that cat this morning on the staircase. Color of brown turf. Say you never see them with three colors. Not true. That half-tabby white tortoise shell in the city arms, with the letter M on her forehead. Body 50 different colors. Houth a while ago, amethyst. Glass flashing. That's how that wise man, what's his name with the burning glass? Then the heather goes on fire. It can't be tourist matches. What? Perhaps the sticks dry rubbed together in the wind and light? Or broken bottles in the firs act as a burning glass in the sun? Archimedes, I have it. My memory's not so bad. Bah, who knows what they're always flying for? Insects? That bee last week got into the room, playing with a shadow on the ceiling. Might be the one that bit me. Come back to see. Birds, too, never find out, or what they say, like our small talk. And says she and says he, nerve they have to fly over the ocean and back. Lots must be killed in storms, telegraph wires. Dreadful life sailors have, too. Big brutes of ocean-going steamers, floundering along in the dark, lowing out like sea cows. Forabella, out of that, bloody curse to you, others in vessels, bit of a handkerchief sail, pitched about like snuff at a wake when the stormy winds do blow. Married, too, sometimes away for years at the ends of the earth somewhere. No ends, really, because it's round. Wife in every port, they say. She has a good job if she minds it, till Johnny comes marching home again, if he ever does. Smelling the tail end of ports. How can they like the sea? Yet they do. The anchor's weighed. Off he sails with a scapular or a medal on him for luck. Well, and the tephilim, no. What's this they call it? Poor Papa's father had on his door to touch. That brought us out of the land of Egypt and into the house of bondage. Something in all those superstitions, because when you go out, never know what dangers. Hanging onto a plank or astride of a beam for grim life, life belt round him, gulping salt water. And that's the last of his nibs till the sharks catch hold of him. Do fish ever get seasick? Then you have a beautiful calm without a cloud, smooth sea, placid, crew and cargo and smithereens. Davy Jones' locker, moon looking down, so peaceful. Not my fault, old cockalorum. A last lonely candle wandered up from the sky from Mira's bazaar in search of funds for Mercer's hospital and broke, drooping, and shed a cluster of violet, but one white stars. They floated, fell, they faded. The shepherd's hour, the hour of folding, hour of tryst. From house to house, giving his every welcome double knock, went the 9 o'clock postman, the glowworm's lamp at his belt gleaming here and there through the laurel hedges, and among the 5 young trees a hoisted linstock lit the lamp at Leah's terrace. By screens of lighted windows, by equal gardens, a shrill voice went crying, wailing, "Evening Telegraph, stop press edition, result of the Gold Cup race." And from the door of Digman's house a boy ran out and called, twittering the bat flew here, flew there. Far out over the sands the coming surf crept. Gray, Houth settled for slumber, tired of long days, of yum-yum rhododendrons. He was old, and felt gladly the night breeze lift, ruffle his fellow ferns. He lay but opened a red eye, unsleeping, deep and slowly breathing, slumberous but awake. And far on Kish Bank the anchored lightship twinkled, winked at Mr. Bloom. Life those chaps out there must have, stuck in the same spot. Irish lights board, penance for their sins, coastguards too. Rocket and breeches, buoy and lifeboat. Day we went out for the pleasure cruise in the Erin's King, throwing them a sack of old papers. Bears in the zoo, filthy trip. Drunkards out to shake up their livers, puking overboard to feed the herrings. Nausea. And the women, fear of God in their faces. Millie, no sign of funk, her blue scarf loose, laughing. Don't know what death is at that age, and then their stomachs clean, but being lost they fear. When we hid behind the tree at Crumlin, I didn't want to. Mama, mama, babes in the wood. Frightening them with masks, too. Throwing them up in the air to catch them. I'll murder you. Is it only half fun? Or children playing battle, whole earnest. How can people aim guns at each other? Sometimes they go off, poor kids. Only troubles wildfire and needler ash. Calomel, purge, I got her for that. After getting better asleep with Molly. Very same teeth she has. What do they love? Another themselves? But the morning she chased her with the umbrella. Perhaps so as not to hurt, I felt her pulse, ticking. Little hand it was, now big. Dearest Popley, all that the hand says when you touch. Love to count my waistcoat buttons. Her first stays, I remember, made me laugh to see, little paps to begin with. Left one is more sensitive, I think. Mine too. Nearer the heart. Patting themselves out if fat is in fashion. Her growing pains at night, calling, wakening me. Frightened she was when her nature came on her first. Poor child. Strange moment for the mother, too. Brings back her childhood. Gibraltar, looking from Buena Vista, O'Hara's tower. The seabirds screaming. Old Barbary ape that gobbled all his family. Sundown, gunfire for the men to cross the lines. Looking out over the sea, she told me. Evening like this, but clear, no clouds. I always thought I'd marry a lord or a rich gentleman coming with a private yacht. Buenas noches, señorita. El hombre ama la mucha hermosa. Why me? Because you were so foreign from the others. Better not stick here all night like a limpet. This weather makes you dull. Must be getting on for 9 by the light. Go home. Too late for Leah, Lily of Killarney. No, might be still up. Call to the hospital to see. Hope she's over. Long day I've had. Martha, the bath, funeral, house of keys, museum with those goddesses, Daedalus' song. Then that baller and Barney Kiernan's. Got my own back there. Drunken ranters, what I said about his god made him wince. Mistake to hit back, or no? Ought to go home and laugh at themselves. Always want to be swilling in company, afraid to be alone like a child of 2. Suppose he hit me. Look at it the other way around. Not so bad then. Perhaps not to hurt, he meant. 3 cheers for Israel. 3 cheers for the sister-in-law he hawked about. 3 fangs in her mouth. Same style of beauty. Particularly nice old party for a cup of tea. The sister of the wife of the wild man of Borneo has just come to town. Imagine that in the early morning at close range. Everyone to his taste, as Morris said when he kissed the cow. But Dignam's put the boots on it. Houses of mourning, so depressing because you never know. Anyhow, she wants the money. Must call to those Scottish widows as I promised. Strange name. Takes it for granted we're going to pop off at first. That widow on Monday was outside Kramer's that looked at me. Buried the poor husband, but progressing favorably on the premium. Her widow's mite? Well, what do you expect her to do? Must wheedle her way along. Widower I hate to see, looks so forlorn. Poor man O'Connor, wife and 5 children poisoned by mussels here. The sewage. Hopeless. Some good matronly woman in a pork pie hat to mother him. Take him in tow, platter face and a large apron. Ladies' grey flannelette bloomers, 3 shillings a pair, astonishing bargain. Plain and loved, love forever, they say. Ugly, no woman thinks she is. Love, lie, and be handsome, for tomorrow we die. We see him sometimes, walking about, trying to find out who played the trick. UP, up. Fate, that is. He, not me. Also, a shop often noticed. Curse seems to dog it. Dreamt last night? Wait. Something confused. She had red slippers on. Turkish. Wore the breeches. Suppose she does. Would I like her in pajamas? Damned hard to answer. Nanetti's gone. Mailboat, near Holyhead by now. Must nail that ad of Keys. Work Hines and Crawford. Petticoats for Molly. She has something to put them in. What's that? Might be money. Mr. Bloom stooped and turned over a piece of paper on the strand. He brought it near his eyes and peered. Letter? No, can't read. Better go. Better. I'm tired to move. Page of an old copybook. All those holes and pebbles. Who could count them? Never know what you find. Bottle with story of a treasure in it. Thrown from a wreck. Parcels post. Children always want to throw things in the sea. Trust? Bread cast on the waters. What's this? Bit of a stick. Oh, exhausted that female has me. Not so young now. Will she come here tomorrow? Wait for her somewhere forever? Must come back. Murderers do. Will I? Mr. Bloom with his stick gently vexed the thick sand at his foot. Write a message for her. Might remain. What? Aye. Some flat-foot tramp on it in the morning. Useless. Washed away. Tide comes here. Saw a pool near her foot. Bend. See my face there. Dark mirror. Breathe on it. Stirs. All those rocks with lines and scars and letters. Oh, those transparent because they don't know. What is the meaning of that other world? I called you naughty boy because I do not like. No room. Let it go. Mr. Bloom effaced the letters with his slow boot. Hopeless things, sand. Nothing grows in it. All fades. No fear of big vessels coming up here. Except Guinness's barges. Round the Kish in 8 days. Done half by design. He flung his wooden pen away. The stick fell in silted sand. Stuck. Now, if you were trying to do that for a week on end, you couldn't. Chance, we'll never meet again. But it was lovely. Goodbye, dear. Thanks. Made me feel so young. Short snooze now, if I had. Must be near 9. Liverpool boat long gone. Not even the smoke. And she can do the other. Did too, and Belfast. I won't go. Race there, race back to Ennis. Let him. Just close my eyes a moment. Won't sleep though. Half dream. Never comes the same. Bad again. No harm in him, just a few. Oh, sweetie, all your little girl white up I saw. Dirty brace girdle. Made me do love sticky. We too, naughty Grace darling. She, him, half past the bed. Met him, pike hoses, frillies for Rall de perfume. Your wife, black hair heave under emben, senorita, young eyes. Mulvey, plump bubs, me bread van. Winkle, red slippers. She, rusty sleep, wander years of dreams. Return tail end. Agendath swoony lovey, showed me her next year in drawers. Return next, enter next, her next. A bat flew here, there, here. Far in the grey a bell chimed. Mr. Bloom with open mouth, his left boot sanded sideways, leaned, breathed, just for a few. Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. The clock on the mantelpiece in the priest's house cooed, where Canon O'Hanlon and Father Conroy and the Reverend John Hughes, S.J., were taking tea and soda bread and butter and fried mutton chops with catsup and talking about cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. Because it was a little canary bird that came out of its little house to tell the time that Gertie McDowell noticed the time she was there because she was as quick as anything about a thing like that, was Gertie McDowell, and she noticed at once that the foreign gentleman was sitting on the rocks looking was cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. De Shill Hollis Amos, De Shill Hollis Amos, De Shill Hollis Amos, send us bright one, light one, Horhorn, quickening and womb fruit, send us bright one, light one, Horhorn, quickening and womb fruit, send us bright one, light one, Horhorn, quickening and womb fruit, hoopsa boy a boy, hoopsa, hoopsa boy a boy, hoopsa, hoopsa boy a boy, hoopsa. Universally, that person's acumen is esteemed very little perceptive concerning whatsoever matters are being held at most profitably by mortals with sapience endowed to be studied, who is ignorant of that which the most in doctrine erudite, and certainly by reason of that in them high minds ornament, deserving of veneration, constantly maintain, when by general consent they affirm that other circumstances being equal by no exterior splendor, is the prosperity of a nation more efficaciously asserted, than by the measure of how far forward may have progressed the tribute of its solicitude for that proliferant continuance, which of evils the original, if it be, assent when fortunately present constitutes the certain sign of omnipotent nature's incorrupted benefaction. For who is there who anything of some significance is apprehended but is conscious that that exterior splendor may be the surface of a downward trending luxulent reality, or on the contrary anyone so there is unilluminated as not to perceive that as no nature's boon can contend against the bounty of increase, so it behooves every most just citizen to become exhortator and admonisher of his semblables, and to tremble lest what had in the past been by the nation excellently commenced might be in the future not with similar excellence accomplished, if an inverecond habit should have gradually traduced the honorable by ancestors transmitted customs that thither of profundity, that one with audacious excessively, who would have the hardihood to rise affirming to no more odious offense, can for anyone be then to oblivious neglect to consign that evangel simultaneously command and promise which on all mortals with prophecy of abundance or with diminution's menace that exalted and reiteratedly procreating function ever irrevocably enjoined. Is it not why, therefore, we shall wonder if, as the best historians relate, among the Celts, who nothing that was not in its nature admirably admired, the art of medicine shall have been highly honored? Not to speak of hostels, leper yards, sweating chambers, plague graves, their greatest doctors, the O'Shiels, the O'Hickeys, the O'Lees, have sedulously set down the divers methods by which the sick and the relapsed found again health, whether the malady had been the trembling wither or loose boyconal flux. Certainly in every public work, which in it anything of gravity contains preparation, should be with importance commensurate, and therefore a plan was by them adopted, whether by having preconsidered, Or, as the maturation of experience, it is difficult in being said, which the discrepant opinions of subsequent inquirers are not up to the present congrued to render manifest. Whereby, maternity was so far from all accident, possibility removed, that whatever care the patient in that all hardest of women hour chiefly required, and not solely for the copiously opulent, but also for her, who not being sufficiently moneyed scarcely, and often, not even scarcely, could subsist valiantly, and for an inconsiderable emolument was provided. To her, nothing already then and thenceforward was any way able to be molestful, for this chiefly felt all citizens except with proliferant mothers prosperity, at all not to can be, and as they had received eternity, gods, mortals, generation to befit them their beholding. When the case was so hoving itself, parturient and vehicle thereward, carrying desire immense among all one another, was impelling on her to be received into that domicile. One thing of prudent nation, not merely in being seen, but also even in being related worthy of being praised, that they her, by anticipation, went seeing mother, that she by them suddenly to be about to be cherished, had been begun, she felt. Before born, bliss babe had, within womb one he worship. Whatever in that one case done commodiously done was, a couch by midwives attended with wholesome food reposeful, cleanest swaddles, as though forthbringing were now done, and by wise foresight set. But to this no less of what drugs there is need, and surgical implements which are pertaining to her case, not omitting aspect of all varied distracting spectacles in various latitudes, by our terrestrial orb offered together with images, divine and human, the cognitation of which by subjunct females is to tumescence conducive, or eases issue in the high sunbright well-built fair home of mothers, when, ostensibly far gone and reproductive, it is come by her thereto to lie in, her term up. Some way that wayfaring was stood by house door at night's oncoming, of Israel's folk was that man that on earth wandering far had fared, stark ruth of man his errand that him lone led to that house. Of that house, Horn is lord, 70 beds keeps he, there teeming mothers are wont that they lie for, to thole and bring forth bairns, hail, so God's angel to Mary quoth. Watchers tway their walk, white sisters in wards sleepless, smarts they still, sickness soothing. In 12 moons thrice an hundred, truest bedthanes they twain are, for horn holding wariest ward. And ward wary the watcher hearing, come that man mild-hearted, eft rising with swire, yimpled to him her gate wide undid. Lo, Leven leaping lightens an eye-blink Ireland's westward welkin. Full she dread that God the wreaker all mankind would fordo with water for his evil sins. Christ's rood made she on breastbone, and him drew that he would rave unfair under her thatch. That man her will wotting worthful went into Horn's house. Loth to irk in Horn's hall, hat holding the seeker stood. On her stow he ere was living with dear wife and lovesome daughter, that then over land and sea floor 9 years had long outwandered. Once her in town hith meeting, he too her bowed had not doffed. Her to forgive now he craved with good ground, of her allowed that of him swift seen face, hers, so young then had looked, light swift her eyes kindled, bloom of blushes his word winning. As her eyes then ongot, his weed swart therefore sorrow she feared. Glad after she was that ere a dread was, her he asked if O'Dare doctor tidings sent from far coast, and she with grameful sigh him answered that O'Hare doctor in heaven was. Sad was the man that word to hear that him so heavied in bowels ruthful. All she there told him, ruing death for a friend so young, Allgate, sore unwilling God's right wiseness to withsay. She said that he had a fair sweet death through God, his goodness with mass priest to be shriven, holy housel and sick men's oil to his limbs. The man then, right earnest, asked the nun of which death the dead man was died, and the nun answered him and said that he was died in Mona Island through belly crab 3 year agone, come Childermas. And she prayed to God, all ruthful, to have his dear soul in his undeathliness. He heard her sad words, and held hat sad staring. So stood they there both a while, and one hope sorrowing one with other. Therefore every man look to that last end that is thy death, and the dust that grippeth on every man that is born of woman, for as he came naked forth from his mother's womb, so naked shall he wend him on the last for to go as he came. The man that was come in the house then spoke to the nursing woman, and he asked her how it fared with the woman that lay there in childbed. The nursing woman answered him and said that that woman was in throes now full 3 days, and that it would be a hard birth enough to bear, but that now in a little it would be. She said thereto that she had seen many births of women, but never was none so hard as was that woman's birth. Then she set it all forth for him, because she knew the man that time was had lived nigh that house. The man hearkened to her words, for he felt with wonder women's woe and the travail that they have of motherhood, and he wondered to look on that face that was a fair face for any man to see, but yet was she left after long years a handmaid. 9-12 blood flows chiding her childless. And while they spake, the door of the castle was opened, and there nighed them a mickle noise, as of many that sat there at meat. And there came against the place as they stood a young learning knight, clept Dixon, and the traveller Leopold was couth to him, sithen it happed that they had had ado with each other in the house of Misericord, where his learning knight lay by cause the traveller Leopold came there to be healed, for he was sore wounded in his breast by a spear, wherewith a horrible and dreadful dragon was smitten him, for which he did do make a salve of volatile salt and chrism as much as he might suffice. And he said now that he should go into that castle for to make merry with them that were there. And the traveller Leopold said that he should go otherwhither, for he was a man of caudles and subtle. Also the lady was of his avis, and reprieved the learning knight she trowed well that the traveller had said thing that was false for his subtility. But the learning knight would not hear, say nay, nor do her mandament have him in aught contrarious to his list, and he said how it was a marvellous castle. And the traveller Leopold went into the castle for to rest him for a space, being sore of limb, after many marches environing in divers lands, and sometime venery. And in the castle was set a board that was of birchwood of Finlandy, and it was upheld by 4 dwarfmen of that country, but they durst not move, more for enchantment. And on this board were frightful swords and knives that are made in the great cavern by sinking demons out of white flames, that they fix then in the horns of buffaloes and stags that are abound marvellously. And there were vessels that were wrought of magic by Mahound out of sea sand, and the air by a warlock with his breath that he blazes into them like bubbles. And full fair cheer and rich was on the board that no wight could devise a fuller ne richer. And there was a vat of silver that was moved by craft to open, in which lay strange fishes without heads, though misbelieving men nee that this be possible thing without they see it nathless they are so. And these fishes lie in an oily water brought there from Portugal lands because of the fatness that therein is like to the juices of the olive press. And also it was a marvel to see in that castle how by magic they make a compost out of fecund wheat kidneys out of chaldy, that by aid of certain angry spirits that they do in it to swells up wondrously like a vast mountain, and they teach the serpents there to entwine themselves up on long sticks out of the ground, and out of the scales of these serpents they brew out a brewage like to mead. And the learning knight let pour for child Leopold a draught, and helped thereto the while all they that were there drink every each. And child Leopold did up his beaver for to pleasure him, and took appertly somewhat in amity, for he never drank no manner of mead, which he then put by, and anon full privily he voided the more part in his neighbour glass, and his neighbour nist not of this while. And he sat down in that castle with them for to rest there a while, thanked be Almighty God. This meanwhile this good sister stood by the door and begged them at reverence of Jesu, our alder liege Lord, to leave their wassailing, for there was above one quick, with child, a gentle dame, whose time hied fast. Sir Leopold heard on the up-floor cry on high, and he wondered what cry that it was, whether of child or woman, and I marvel, said he, that it be not come or now. Meseems it dureth over long, and he was ware, and saw a franklin that hight Linehan on that side of the table that was older than any of the t'other, and for that they both were knights virtuous in the one emprise, and eke by cause that he was elder he spoke to him full gently. But, said he, or it be long too she will bring forth by God his bounty, and have joy of her childing, for hath she waited marvellous long. And the franklin that had drunken said, expecting each moment to be her next, also he took the cup that stood tofore him, for him needed never none asking nor desiring of him to drink. And now drink, said he, fully delectably, and he quaffed as far as he might to their both's health, for he was a passing good man of his lustiness. And Sir Leopold, that was the goodliest guest that ever sat in Scholars' Hall, and that was the meekest man and the kindest that ever laid husbandly hand under hen, and that was the very truest knight of the world, one that ever did minion service to Lady Gentle, pledged him courtly in the cup. Woman's woe with wonder pondering. Now let us speak of that fellowship that was there to the intent to be drunken on they might. There was a sort of scholars along either side the board, that is to wit, Dixon, yclept Junior of St. Mary Merciables, with other his fellows Lynch and Madden, scholars of medicine, and the Franklin, that hight Linehan, and one from Alba Longa, one Crothers, and young Stephen that had mien of a frere, that was at the head of the board, and Costello that men clepen, Punch Costello, all long of a mastery of him erewhile jested, and of all of them reserved young Stephen, he was the most drunkard that demanded still of more mead. And beside the meek Sir Leopold, but on young Malachi they waited for that he promised to have come, and such as intended to no goodness said how he broke his avow. And Sir Leopold sat with them, for he bore fast friendship to Sir Simon, and to this his son young Stephen, and for that his languor becalmed him, there after longest wanderings, insomuch as they feasted him for that time, in the honorablest manner. Ruth read him, love led on, with will to wander, loth to leave. For they were right witty scholars, and he heard their era sons, each gin other as touching birth and righteousness, young Madden maintaining that put such case it were hard the wife to die, for so it had fallen out a matter of some year agone with a woman of Ablana in Horn's house, that now was trespassed out of this world, and the self-night next before her death, all leeches and apothecaries had taken counsel of her case. And they said farther she should live because in the beginning, they said, the woman should bring forth in pain, and wherefore, that they were of this imagination, affirmed how young Madden had said truth, for he had conscience to let her die. And not few and of these was young Lynch, were in doubt that the world was now right evil, governed as it was, never. Other howbeit, the mean people believed it otherwise, but the law nor his judges did provide no remedy. A redress God grant. This was scant said, but all cried with one acclaim, nay, by our Virgin Mother, the wife should live and the babe to die. And colour whereof they waxed hot upon that head with the argument, and what for their drinking but the Franklin Linehan was prompt each when to pour them ale, so that at the least way mirth might not lack. Then young Madden showed all the whole affair, and said how that she was dead, and how for holy religion's sake by Retta of Palmer and Bedesman, and for a vow he made to St. Ultan of Arbercan, her good man, husband would not let her death, whereby they were all wondrous grieved. To whom young Stephen had these words following, Murmur, sirs, is eke oft among lay folk, both babe and parent now glorify their Maker, the one in limbo gloom, the other in purge fire. But gramercy, and of those God-possibled souls that we nightly impossibilize, which is the sin against the Holy Ghost, very God, Lord and Giver of life? For, sirs, he said, our lust is brief. We are means to those small creatures within us, and nature has other ends than we. Then said Dixon Junior to Punch Costello, wist he what ends, but he had overmuch drunken, and the best word he could have of him was that he would ever dishonest a woman, whoso she were, or wife, or maid, or leman, if it so fortune him to be delivered of his spleen of lustihead. Whereat Crothers of Alba Longa sang young Malachi's praise of that beast the unicorn, how once in the millennium he cometh by his horn, and all other this while pricked forward with their jibes, wherewith they did malice him, witnessing all and several by Saint Futinus his engines, that he was able to do any manner of thing that lay in man to do. Thereat laughed they all right jokingly, only young Stephen and Sir Leopold, which never durst laugh too open by reason of a strange humour, would he not bewray, and also for that he rued for her that bare whoso she might be, or wheresoever. Then spake young Stephen, Orgulus of Mother Church, that would cast him out of her bosom, of law of canons, of Lilith, patron of abortions, of bigness wrought by wind of seeds, of brightness, or by potency of vampires mouth to mouth, or as Virgilius saith, the influence of the Occident, or by the reek of moonflower, or and she with a woman, which her man has but lain with, effecto secudo, or peradventure in her bath according to the opinions of Averroes and Moses Maimonides. He said also how at the end of the 2nd month a human soul was infused, and how in all our holy mother foldeth ever souls for God's greater glory, whereas that earthly mother, which was but a dam to bear beastly, should die by cannon, for so saith he that holdeth the fisherman's seal. Even that blessed Petter, on which rock was holy church for all ages founded. All they bachelors then asked of Sir Leopold, would he in like case so jeopard her person as risk life to save life? A wariness of mind he would answer as fitted all, and laying hand to jaw, he said dissembling, as his wont was, that as it was informed him, who had ever loved the art of physic as might a layman, and agreeing also with his experience of so seldom seen an accident, it was good for that mother church belike at one blow had birth and death pence, and in such sort delivery he scaped their questions. That is truth, party, said Dixon, and, or I, ere, a pregnant word. Which hearing young Stephen was a marvellous glad man, and he averred that he who stealeth from the poor lendeth to the Lord, for he was of a wild manner when he was drunken, and that he was now, and that taking it appeared eftsoons. But Sir Leopold was passing grave maugre his word, by cause he still had pity of the terror-causing shrieking of shrill women in their labour, and as he was minded of his good Lady Marian that had borne him, an only man-child, which on his 11th day on live had died, and no man of art could save so dark his destiny. And she was wonder-stricken of heart for that evil hap, and for his burial did him on a fair corslet of lamb's wool, the flower of the flock, lest he might perish utterly, and lie accolade. For it was then about the midst of the winter. And now Sir Leopold, that had of his body no man-child for an heir, looked upon him his friend's son, and was shut up in sorrow for his forepast happiness, and as sad as he was that him failed a son of such gentle courage, for all accounted him of real parts, so grieved he also in no less measure for young Stephen that he lived riotously with those wastrels and murdered his goods with whores. About that present time young Stephen filled all cups that stood empty, so as there remained but little mo, if the prudenter had not shadowed their approach from him that still plied it very busily who, praying for the intentions of those sovereign pontiff, he gave them for a pledge the vicar of Christ, which also, as he said, is vicar of Bray. Now drink we, quod he, of this mazer and quaff ye this mead, which is not indeed parcel of my body, but my soul's bodiment. Leave ye fraction of bread to them that live by bread alone. Be not afeard, neither, for any want for this will comfort more than the other will dismay. See ye here. And he showed them glistering coins of the tribute and goldsmith's notes worth of £2 19 that he had. He said, for a song which he writ. They all admired to see the foresaid riches and such dearth of money as was here before. His words were then these as followeth. Know all men, he said, time ruins build eternity's mansions. What means this? Desire's wind blasts the thorn tree, but after it becomes a bramble bush to be a rose upon the root of time. Mark me now, in woman's womb word is made flesh, but in the spirit of the Maker, all flesh that passes becomes the word that shall not pass away. This is the post-creation, omnis caro et divinet. No question but her name is Puissant, who aventreed the dear course of our Agenbuyer, healer and herd, our mighty mother and mother most venerable, and Bernardus saith aptly that she hath an omnipotium deperae supplicum, that is to wit, an almightiness of petition, because she is the second Eve, and she won us, saith Augustine too, whereas that other, our grandam, which we are linked up by with successive anastomosis of naval cords, sold us all, seed, breed, and generation, for a penny pippin. But here's the matter now, or she knew him, that second I say, but was creature of creature, virgina madre, filia de tua filio. Or she knew him not, and then stands she in the one denial or ignorancy with Peter Piscator, who lives in the house that Jack built, and with Joseph the joiner, patron of the happy demise of all unhappy marriages. Parce que, monsieur Leo Taxil, nous a dit qu'il a la vie mise dans cette fichue position, c'était la sacre prision ventre des deux ant vida. Transubstantially, oda, consubstantially, but in no case subsubstantially. And all cried out upon it for the very scurvy word, a pregnancy without joy, he said, a bird without pangs, a body without blemish, a belly without bigness. Let the lewd with faith and fervor worship, with will we withstand with say. Hereupon Punch Costello dinged with his fist upon the board, and would sing a bawdy catch, stabu stabella, about a wench that was put in pod of a jolly swashbuckler, and all many, which he did straightways now attack. The first 3 months she was not well, stabu. When here Nurse Quigley from the door angrily bid them hist ye should shame you, nor was it not meet, as she remembered them being her mind, was to have all orderly against Lord Andrew came for, because she was jealous, that no gasteful turmoil might shorten the honour of her guard. It was an ancient and a sad matron of a sedate look, and Christian walking, in habit done beseeming her megrims and wrinkled visage, nor did her hortative want of it effect, for incontinently Punch Costello was of them all embraided, and they reclaimed the churl with civil rudeness, some, and shaked him with menace of blandishments, others whiles they all chode with him. A murrain seized the dolt. What a devil he would be at, thou chuff, thou puny, thou got in peace straw, thou loosel, thou chitterling, thou spawn of a rebel, thou dyke dropped, thou abortion thou, to shut up his drunken drool out of that like a curse of God ape, the good Sir Leopold that had for his cognizance the flower of quiet, margarine gentle, advising also the time's occasion as most sacred, and most worthy to be most sacred. In Horn's house rest should reign. To be short, this passage was scarce, by when Master Dixon of Marion Eccles, goodly grinning, asked young Stephen what was the reason why he had not sided to take friar's vows, and he answered him obedience in the womb, chastity in the tomb, but involuntary poverty all his days. Master Linehan at his maid return, that he had heard of these nefarious deeds, and how, as he heard hereof counted, he had besmirched the lily virtue of a confiding female, which was corruption of minors, and they all intershowed it too, waxing merry and toasting to his fathership. But he said very entirely, it was clean contrary to their suppose, for he was the eternal Son and ever virgin. Thereat mirth grew in them the more, and they rehearsed to him his curious rite of wedlock, for the disrobing and deflowering of spouses, as the priests use in Madagascar Island. She to be in guise of white and saffron, her groom in white and grain, burning of nard and tapers on a bride bed, while clerks sung Kyrios and anthem, Ut nevetur sexus omnis corporis mysterium, till she was there unmated. He gave them a much admirable hymen minim, by those delicate poets Master John Fletcher and Master Francis Beaumont. That is in their maid's tragedy, that was writ for a like twining of lovers. To bed was the burden of it to be played with accompanable consent upon the virginals. An exquisite dulce, epithalum of the most maleficative swadancy for juveniles amatory, whom the odoriferous flambeaux of the paranymphs have escorted to the quadrupedal proscenium of connubial communion. Well met they were, said Master Dixon, joyed, but hark ye, young sir, better were they named Beaumont and Letcher. For by my troth, of such a mingling much might come. Young Stephen said indeed to his best remembrance, they had but the one doxy between them, and she of the stews to make shift within delights, amorous for life, ran very high in those days, and the custom of the contrary approved with it. Greater love than this, he said, no man hath, that a man lay down his wife for his friend. Go thou and do likewise. Thus, or words to that effect, said Zarathustra. Sometime Regius Professor of French Letters to the University of Oxtail, nor breathed there ever that man to whom mankind was more beholden. Bring a stranger within thy tower, it will go hard, but thou wilt have the second best bed. Orate fratres pro mimetipso. And all the people shall say Amen. Remember, Aaron, thy generations and thy days of old, how thou saidst, little by me, and by word, and broughtest in a stranger to my gates to commit fornication in my sight, and to wax fat, and kick like Jeshurun. Therefore hast thou sinned against my light, and hast made me thy lord to be the slave of servants. Return, return, Clan Millie, forget me not, O Milesian. Why hast thou done this abomination before me, that thou didst spurn me for a merchant of Jalaps, and didst deny me to the Roman and to the Indian of dark speech with whom thy daughters did lie luxuriously? Look forth now, my people, upon the land of behest, even from Horeb to Nebo, and from Pisgah, and from the horns of Hattin unto a land flowing with milk and honey. But thou hast suckled me with a bitter milk, my moon and my sun thou hast quenched forever, and thou hast left me alone forever in the dark ways of my bitterness, and with a kiss of ashes hast thou kissed my mouth. This tenebrosity of the interior, he proceeded to say, hath not been illumined by the wit of the Septuagint, nor so much as mentioned for the Orient from on high, which brake hell's gate visited a darkness that was foraneous. Assuefaction minerates atrocities, as Tully saith of his darling Stoics, and Hamlet his father showeth the prince no blister of combustion. The adiaphane in the high noon of life is Egypt's plague, which in the nights of prenativity and post-mortemity is their most proper ubi and quo modo. And as the ends and ultimates of all things accord in some mean and measure with their inceptions and originals, that the same multiplicit concordance which leads forth growth from birth accomplishing by a retrogressive metamorphosis, that minishing and ablation towards the final, which is agreeable unto nature, so is it with our subsolar being. The aged sisters draw us into life, we wail, batten, sport, clip, clasp, sunder, dwindle, die. Over us dead they bend, first saved from waters of old Nile, among bulrushes, a bed of fasciated wattles, at last the cavity of a mountain, an occulted sepulchre amid the conclamation of the hill cat and the ossifrage. And as no man knows the ubicity of the tumulus, nor to what processes we shall thereby be ushered, nor whether to Tophet or to Edenville, in the like way is all hidden, when we would backward see from what region of remoteness the whatness of our who-ness hath fetched his whenceness. Thereto Punch Costello roared out mainly, Etienne Johnson, but he loudly bid them, lo, wisdom hath built herself a house, this vast majestic long-stablished vault, the crystal palace of the Creator, all in apple pie order, a penny for him who finds the plea. Behold the mansion reared by dead old Jack, see the malt stored in many refluent sack, in the proud cirque of Jack John's bivouac. A black crack of noise in the street here, alack bawled back, loud on left Thor thundered, in anger awful the hammer hurler. Came now the storm that hissed his heart, and Master Lynch bade him have a care to flout, and wit wanton as the god's self was angered for his hell-prate and paganry. And he that had erst challenged to be so doughty waxed wan, that they might all mark and shrank together, and his pitch that was before so hot uplift was now of a sudden quite plucked down, and his heart shook within the cage of his breast as he tasted the rumour of that storm. Then did some mock and some jeer, and Punch Costello fell hard again to his yale, which Master Linehan vowed he would do after, and he was indeed but a word and a blow on any the least colour. But the braggart boaster cried that an old nobodaddy was in his cups, it was much what indifferent, and he would not lag behind his head. But this was only to die his desperation, as cowed he crouched in Horn's hall, he drank indeed at one draught to pluck up a heart of any grace, for it thundered long rumblingly over the heavens, so that Master Madden, being godly certain whiles, knocked him on his ribs upon that crack of doom, and Master Bloom at the braggart's side spoke to him calming words to slumber his great fear, advertising how it was no other thing but a hubbub noise that he heard, the discharge of fluid from the thunderhead. Look you, having taken place, and of all the order of natural phenomena. But was young Boasthard's fear vanquished by calmer words? No, for he had in his bosom a spike named bitterness, which could not by words be done away. And was he then neither calm like the one, nor godly like the other? He was neither as much as he would have liked to be either. But could he not have endeavoured to have found again in his youth the bottle holiness that then he lived withal? Indeed, no, for grace was not there to find that bottle. Heard he then in that clap the voice of the god bring forth, or what Calmer said, a hubbub of phenomena? Heard? Why he could not but hear unless he had plugged him in the tube understanding, which he had not done. For though that tube he saw that he was in the land of phenomena, where he must for a certain one day die, as he was like the rest too a passing show. And would he not accept to die like the rest and pass away? By no means would he, though he must, nor would he make more shows according as men do with wives, which phenomenon has commanded them to do by the book law. Then wotted he not of that other land which is called Believe on Me, that is the land of promise which behooves to the king delightful, and shall be forever, where there is no death, and no birth, neither wiving nor mothering, at which all shall come as many as believe on it? Yes, Pius had told him of that land, and Chaste had pointed him to the way, but the reason was that in the way he fell in with a certain whore of an eye-pleasing exterior, whose name, she said, is Bird in the Hand, and she beguiled him wrong ways from the true path by her flatteries, and that she said to him as, Ho, you pretty man, turn aside hither, and I will show you a brave place. And she lay at him so flatteringly that she had him in her grot, which is named Two in the Bush, or by some learned, carnal concupiscence. This was it, what all that company that sat there at commons and manse of mothers, the most lusted after if they met with this whore Bird in the Hand, which was within all foul plagues, monsters, and a wicked devil. They would strain the last, but they would make it her and know her. For regarding believe on me, they said it was naught else but notion, and they could conceive no thought of it. For first, Two in the Bush, whether she ticed them, was the very goodliest grot, and in it were 4 pillows, on which were 4 tickets with these words printed on them: Pick-a-back and topsy-turvy, and shame-face, and cheek by jowl. And second, for that foul plague, all-pox, and the monsters they cared not for them, for preservative had given them a stout shield of oxen gut. And third, that they might take no hurt, neither from offspring that was wicked devil by virtue of this same shield, which was named Killchild. So were they all in their blind fancy, Mr. Cavil and Mr. Sometimes Godly, Mr. Ape Swill Ale, Mr. False Franklin, Mr. Dainty Dixon, young Boasthard, and Mr. Cautious Calmer. Wherein, O wretched company, were ye all deceived? For that was the voice of the god that was in very grievous rage, that he would presently lift his arm up, and spill their souls for their abuses, and their spillings done by them, contrariwise to his word which forth to bring brinningly biddeth. So Thursday 16th June Patrick Dignam laid in clay an apoplexy, and after hard draught, please God, rained a bargeman coming in by water a 50 mile or thereabout with turf, saying the seed won't sprout, fields athirst, very sad color, and stunk mightily, the quags and toffs too. Hard to breathe, and all the young quicks clean consumed without sprinkle, this long while back, as no man remembered to be without. The rosy buds all gone brown and spread out blobs, and on the hills naught but dry flag and faggots that would catch at first fire. All the world saying, for aught they knew, the big wind of last February, a year that did havoc the land, so pitifully a small thing beside his barrenness. But by and by, as said, this evening after sundown, the wind sitting in the west, biggish, swollen clouds to be seen as the night increased, and the weatherwise pouring up at them, and some sheet lightnings at first and after, past 10 of the clock. One great stroke with a long thunder, and in a brace of shakes all scamper pell-mell within door for smoking shower. The men making shelter for their straws with a clout or kerchief, women folks skipping off with curdles, catched up soon as the pour came. In Ely Place, Bagot Street, Duke's Lawn, thence through Marion Green up to Hollis Street, a swash of water flowing that was before bone dry, and not one chair or coach or fiacre seen about, but no more crack after that first. Over against the Right Honourable Mr. Justice Fitzgibbon's door, that is to sit with Mr. Healy, the lawyer, upon the college lands. Mal Mulligan, a gentleman's gentleman, that had but come from Mr. Moore's, the writer's, that was a papish, but as now folks say, a good Williamite, chanced against Alec. Bannon and a cut-bob, which are now in with dance cloaks of kindle green, that was new, got to town from Mullinger with the stage, where his cause and Mal M's brother will stay a month, yet till St. Swithin, and asks what in the earth he does there. He bound home, and he to Andrew Horn's being stayed for to crush a cup of wine, so he said, but would tell him of a skittish heifer, big of her age, and beef to the heel. And all this while poured with rain, and so both together onto Horns. There, Leop Bloom of Crawford's journals, sitting snug with a covey of wags, likely brangling fellows, Dixon June, scholar of My Lady of Mercies, Ven Lynch, a Scots fellow, Will Madden, T. Linehan, very sad about a racer he fancied, and Stephen de Leopold Bloom. There for a languor he had but was now better, be having dreamed tonight a strange fancy of his dame Miss Mole with red slippers on and a pair of turkey trunks, which is thought by those in ken to be for a change, and Mistress Purefoy there, that got in through pleading her belly, and now on the stools, poor body, 2 days past her term, the midwife sore put to it, and can't deliver. She queasy for a bowl of rice slop that is a shrewd dryer up the insides, and her breath very heavy, more than good, and should be a bully boy from the knocks, they say, but God give her soon issue. 'Tis her ninth chick to live, I hear, and Lady Day bit off her last chick's nail. That was then a 12-month, and with the other 3 all breastfed that died written out in a fair hand in the King's Bible. Her hub 50-odd, and a Methodist, but takes the sacrament, and is to be seen any fair Sabbath with a pair of his boys off Bullock Harbor, dapping on the Sound with a heavy-braked reel, or in a punt he has trailing for flounder and pollock, and catches a fine bag. I hear. In some, an infinite great fall of rain, and all refreshed, and will much increase the harvest. Yet those in kin say after wind and water, fire shall come for a prognostication of Malachi's almanac. And I hear that Mr. Russell has done a prophetical charm of the same gist out of the Hindustanish for his Farmer's Gazette, to have 3 things in all, but this a mere fetch without bottom of reason for old crones and bairns, yet sometimes they are found in the right guess with their queerities, no telling how. When this came up, Linehan's at the feet of the table to say how the letter was in that night's Gazette, and he made a show to find it out about him, for he swore with an oath that he had been at pains about it. But on Stephen's persuasion he gave over the search and was bidden to sit near by, which he did mighty brisk. He was a kind of sports gentleman that went for a Merry Andrew or honest pickle, and what belonged of women, horseflesh, or hot scandal, he had it pat. To tell the truth, he was mean in fortunes, and for the most part hankered about the coffee houses and low taverns with crimps, ostlers, bookies, Paul's men, runners, flat caps, waistcoateers, ladies of the bagnio, and other rogues of the game, or with a chanceable catchpole or a tipstaff often at nights, till broad day, of whom he picked up between his sack possets much loose gossip. He took his ordinary at a boiling cook's, and if he had but gotten into him a mess of broken victuals, or a platter of tripes with a bare tester in his purse, he could always bring himself off with his tongue, some randy quip he had from a punk or what not, that every mother's son of them would burst their sides. The other, Costello that is, hearing this talk, asked was it poetry or a tale? Faith no, he says, Frank, that was his name, 'tis all about Kerry cows that are to be butchered along of the plague. But they can go hang, says he with a wink, for me with their bully beef, a pox on it. There's as good fish in this tin as ever came out of it, and very friendly he offered to take some of the salty sprats that stood by, which he had eyed wishly in the meantime, and found the place, which was indeed the chief design of his embassy, as he was sharp set. Moravesh, says Frank, then in the French language, that had been indentured to a brandy shipper, that has a wine lodge in Bordeaux, and he spoke French like a gentleman too. From a child this Frank had been a donut that his father, a Headborough, who could ill keep him in school. To learn his letters and the use of the globes, matriculated at the university to study the mechanics, but he took the bit between his teeth like a raw colt, and was more familiar with the justiciary and the parish beadle than with his volumes. One time he would be a play actor, then a suddler, and a welsher. Then naught would keep him from the bear pit and the cocking mane, then he was for the ocean sea, or to hoof it on the roads with the Romany folk, kidnapping a squire's heir by favor of moonlight, or fecking maids linen or choking chicken behind a hedge. He had been off as many times as a cat has lives, and back again with naked pockets, as many more to his father, the Headborough, who shed a pint of tears as often as he saw him. What says Mr. Leopold with his hands across? That was earnest to know the drift of it. Will they slaughter all? I protest I saw them but this day morning going to the Liverpool boats, says he. I can scarce believe 'tis so bad, says he, and he had experience of the like brood beasts and of springers, greasy hoggets, and weather wool, having been some years before actuary for Mr. Joseph Cuff, a worthy salesmaster that drove his trade for livestock, and meadow auctions hard by Mr. Gavin Lowe's yard in Prussia Street. I question with you there, says he. More like 'tis the whose or the timber tongue. Mr. Stephen, a little moved, but very handsomely told him no such matter, and that he had dispatches from the Emperor's chief tail tickler, thanking him for the hospitality that was sending over Dr. Renderpist, the best quoted cowcatcher in all of Muscovy, with a bolus or two of physic to take the bull by the horns. Come, says Mr. Vincent, plain dealing. He'll find himself on the horns of a dilemma if he meddles with a bull that's Irish, says he. Irish by name and Irish by nature, says Mr. Stephen. And he sent the ale purling about, an Irish bull in an English china shop. I conceive you, says Mr. Dixon. It is the same bull that was sent to our islands by Farmer Nicholas, the bravest cattle breeder of them all, with an emerald ring in his nose. True for you, says Mr. Vincent across the table, and a bullseye into the bargain, says he, and a plumper and a portlier bull, says he, never shit on Shamrock. He had horns galore, a coat of cloth of gold, and a sweet smoky breath coming out of his nostrils, so that the women of our island, leaving dough balls and rolling pins, followed after him, hanging his bulliness in daisy chains. Wait for that, says Mr. Dixon, but before he came over, Farmer Nicholas, that was a eunuch, had him properly gelded by a college of doctors who were no better off than himself. So be off now, says he, and do all my cousin German, the Lord Harry, tells you, and take a farmer's blessing. And with that he slapped his posteriors very soundly. But the slap and the blessing stood him friend, says Mr. Vincent, for to make up he taught him a trick worth two or the other, so that maid, wife, abbess, and widow to this day affirm they would rather any time of the month whisper in his ear in the dark of a cowhouse, or get a lick on the nape from his long holy tongue, than lie with the finest strapping young ravisher in the four fields of all Ireland. Another then put in his word, and they dressed him, says he, in a point shift and petticoat, with a tippet and girdle and ruffles on his wrist, and clipped his forelock, and rubbed him all over with spermaceti oil, and built stables for him at every turn of the road, with a gold manger in each full of the best hay in the market, so that he could doss and dung to his heart's content. By this time the father of the faithful, for so they called him, was grown so heavy that he could scarce walk to pasture. To remedy which our cozening dames and damsels brought him his fodder in their apron laps, and as soon as his belly was full he would rear up on his hindquarters to show their ladyships a mystery, and roar and bellow out him in bull's language, and they all after him. Ay, says another, and so pampered was he that he would suffer naught to grow in the land but green grass for himself, for that was the only colour to his mind. And there was a board put up a hillock on the middle of the island with a printed notice saying, "By the Lord Harry, green is the grass that grows on the ground." And says Mr. Dixon, if ever he got a scent of a cattle raider on Roscommon or the wilds of Connemara, or a husbandman in Sligo that was sowing as much as a handful of mustard or a bag of rapeseed out, he'd run amok over half the countryside, rooting up by his horns whatever was planted, and all by Lord Harry's orders. There was bad blood between them at first, says Mr. Vincent, and the Lord Harry called Farmer Nicholas all the old nicks in the world, and an old whoremaster that kept 7 trolls in his house. And I'll meddle in this matters, says he. I'll make that animal smell hell, says he, with the help of that good pizzle my father left me. But one evening, says Mr. Dixon, when the Lord Harry was cleaning his royal pelt to go to dinner after winning a boat race, he had spade oars for himself, but the first rule, of course, was that the others were to row with pitchforks. He discovered in himself a wonderful likeness to a bull, and on picking up a black-thumb chapbook he kept in the pantry, he found sure enough that he was the left-handed descendant of the famous champion bull of the Romans, Bos Bovum, which is good, bog Latin for the boss of the show. After that, says Mr. Vincent, the Lord Harry put his head into a cow's drinking trough in the presence of all his courtiers, and pulling it out again, told them all his new name. Then, with the water running off him, he got into an old smock and shirt that had belonged to his grandmother, and bought a grammar of the bull's language to study, but he could never learn a word of it except the first personal pronoun, which he copied out big and got off by heart. And if ever he went out for a walk, he filled his pockets with chalk to write upon what took his fancy, the side of a rock, or a tea-house table, or a bale of cotton, or a cork float. In short, he and the Bull of Ireland were soon as fast friends as an arse and a shirt. They were, says Mr. Stephen, and the end was that the men of the island, seeing no help was toward, as the ungreat women were all of mind, made a wary raft, loaded themselves and their bundles of chattels on shipboard, set all masts erect, manned the yards, sprang their luff, heaved to, spread 3 sheets in the wind, put her head between wind and water, weighed anchor, ported her helm, ran up the Jolly Roger, gave 3 times 3, let the Bulgin run, pushed off in their bumboat, and put to sea to recover the Main of America, which was the occasion, says Mr. Vincent, of the composing by a boatswain of that rollicking chanty, Pope Peter's but a piss-a-bed, and a man's a man for a that. Our worthy acquaintance, Mr. Malachi Mulligan, now appeared in the doorway as the students were finishing their apologue, accompanied with a friend whom he had just re-encountered, a young gentleman, his name Alec Bannon, who had late come to town, it being his intention to buy a colour or a cornetcy in the fencibles and list for the wars. Mr. Mulligan was civil enough to express some relish of it, all the more as it jumped with a project of his own for the cure of the very evil it had been touched upon. Whereat he handed round to the company a set of pasteboard cards, which he had printed that day at Mr. Quinnell's, bearing a legend printed in fair italics, Mr. Malachi Mulligan, Fertilizer and Incubator, Lambay Island. His project, as he went on to expound, was to withdraw from the round of idle pleasures, such as form the chief business of Sir Fopling Popinjay and Sir Milksop Quinnock in town, and devote himself to the noblest task for which our bodily organism has been framed. Well, let us hear of it, my good friend, Mr. Dixon said. I make no doubt it smacks of wenching. Come, be seated, both. 'Tis as cheap sitting as standing. Mr. Mulligan accepted of the invitation, and expatiating upon his design, told his hearers that he had been led into this thought by a consideration of the causes of sterility, both the inhibitory and the prohibitory, whether the inhibition in its turn were due to conjugal vexations or to a parsimony of the balance, as well as whether the prohibition proceeded from defects congenital or from the proclivities acquired. It grieved him plaguely, he said, to see the nuptial couch defrauded of its dearest pledges, and to reflect upon so many agreeable females with rich jointures, a prey to the vilest bonzes who hid their flambeaux under a bushel in an uncongenial cloister, or lose their womanly bloom in the embraces of some unaccountable muskin, when they might multiply the inlets of happiness, sacrificing the inestimable jewel of their sex when 100 pretty fellows were at hand to caress. This, he assured them, made his heart weep. To curb this inconvenient, which he concluded due to a suppression of latent heat, having advised with certain counsellors of worth and inspected into this matter, he had resolved to purchase in fees simple for ever the freehold of Lambay Island from its holder, Lord Talbot de Malahide, a Tory gentleman of note, much in favour with our ascendancy party. He proposed to set up there a national fertilizing farm to be named Omphalos, with an obelisk hewn and erected after the fashion of Egypt, and to offer his dutiful yeoman services for the fecundation of any female of what grade of life soever who should there direct him to the desire of fulfilling the functions of her natural. Money was no object, he said, nor would he take a penny for his pains. The poorest kitchen wench, no less than the opulent lady of fashion, if so be their constructions and their tempers were warm persuaders for their petitions, would find him their man. For this nutriment he shewed how he would feed himself exclusively upon a diet of savoury tubercles and fish and conies there, the flesh of these latter prolific rodents being highly recommended for his purpose, both broiled and stewed with a blade of mace and a pod or two of capsicum chilies. After this homily, which he delivered with much warmth of asseveration, Mr. Mulligan, in a trice, put off from his hat a kerchief with which he had shielded it. They both, it seems, had been overtaken by the rain, and for all their mending their pace had taken water, as might be observed by Mr. Mulligan's small clothes of a hodden grey, which was now somewhat piebald. His project, meanwhile, was very favourably entertained by his auditors, and won hearty eulogies from all, though Mr. Dixon of Mary's accepted to it, asking with a finicking air did he propose to also carry coals to Newcastle. Mr. Mulligan, however, made court to the scholarly by an apt quotation from the classics which, as it dwelt upon his memory, seemed to him a sound and tasteful support of his contention. Tale sectanta depravatio hujus seculi, equirites u metris familiam, nostre lascivas, cujus libe simiviri libici titillationis, testibus ponderosis atque